Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend Podcast. I'm Mike Horne, your host, and I'm thrilled to have as a guest in today's studio, Steve Fisher. And we are diving into the future in this particular episode of the People Dividend Podcast, how emerging technologies, biological revolutions, energy abundance are reshaping how we live and work and think. And I'm really glad to have as a guest on today's episode to discuss those topics with me, Steve Fisher. He's a world-renowned futurist, entrepreneur, and podcaster with over 30 years of experience driving transformational change. Along with his partner, Dr. Janae Duane, they've authored a book that's out recently. Their most recent book, Super Shifts, Transforming How We Live, Learn, and Work in the Age of Intelligence. So, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Mike. It's good to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Great, as am I, and I know our listeners are as well. Your book, Super Shifts, it explores the catalysts for change that are reshaping our world. And there are many of them that are present today. For our listeners, what's the most important shift happening right now that leaders and individuals need to understand, and why? I talk a lot in my work about the advancing gig economy, the shortening work week in the United States, the permanence of variable work location. And I talk about the implications of that for leaders, particularly the exercise of people-centered leadership. But in your book, Super Shifts, what's the most important shift happening? And I think that's at a level higher than I might be thinking, that leaders and individuals need to understand. And why do we need to understand that, Steve?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with this shifts. It can be very personal for each person. Someone who's really involved in climate and sustainability, something like eco awakening can be, the thing that if somebody's involved in diversity or culture or, the aspects of society and remix. And then there's it depends. But I think the one that is on everybody's, conversations, everything that they're dealing with, and you mentioned job loss and automation is, in telefusion. Because, tech acceleration is another super shift, but that is I would say the exponential change in the things that we're seeing. Because the one thing I talk about with clients of mine and just on the book tour is what's different this time. If you think about, as you mentioned 30 years, it's either a good or a bad thing for people. But like I started my career as a network engineer and I walked through that change into networking of offices into the internet and then, going online and then e-commerce and social media. I've seen, the busts, the booms, the bubbles over this period. And, I'm a product guy. Like I make stuff. That's my thing. Like I make, it could be artifacts of the future. It could be prototype, it could be a lot of things. And I'm an artist as well. So for me, that creation, and this will link to the age of intelligence aspect of this, because it's what it means to be creative and the stuff that comes from us naturally versus the things we create. I think the big one is IntelliFusion. I think when you get into the mixing of what is artificial, we talk about three types of intelligence in the book. We talk about the networked intelligence, the artificial intelligence, and the human intelligence. And, for the first time, we have systems that could be more intelligent. We're the apex predator, the smartest thing on, we believe, maybe dolphins are, I don't know, farthest thing on Earth. That's a challenge to what it means to be human. And I think for all of us, we feel it. I'm talking to those clients and people on the book tours that before those bubbles and bursts, you could make the change. Like you could be, because if you were in 97 and you were doing Windows app development, you were gainfully employed. By 2002, you better have learned web development, but you had time, right? You had time to retrain yourself to learn new tech. This stuff is just blitzingly fast, and people are either adapting or they're struggling or they leave or they're where the company thinks they can do more with the automation. So yeah, I think that is it has such a systemic effect. And my co-writer and my partner in the business and in life, and Janae's my wife, but if you want to learn a lot about your spouse, write a book together. But this is our second book, and I think for us, the rhythm of it, she's a systems thinker, so she sees this like opportunity that we are, even though we feel mostly, I mean, for those listening in the United States or maybe in UK, I mean, there's a lot of change. And there's a failing institutions. There's a lot of systemic change. In a way, this could be good, but it's going to be rough. And I think if people can prepare themselves and understand what they want to do with their life and how to align it with the things, they can look at this as a transformative opportunity. So,
As a person who's been invited to speak at a number of conferences on the topic of AI and
mhm.
human resources roles, and having recently led a panel on that at Golden Gate University, when you talk about the rise of the AI colleague and the concept of intellifusion, what do you think are the top steps that leaders can take to ensure responsible human AI collaboration in the workplace?
I think that they need to understand that it is a couple things, that there's a skill shift that the people need to be able to have time. Yes, they want it all now, but we are human and we can adapt. There's an opportunity to look at this stuff as collaborative, not replacement. I think that's the real crux of it, is that a lot of these CEOs they don't look at it as a value add, a way to exponentially increase the value of the staff. They see it as a way to cut costs and service the shareholders. I think in the end, those who don't prepare for the collaborative nature of it and they're just trying to throw chatbots at things are going to fail. I think we saw this last time with Web3 a couple of years ago. Everyone was talking blockchain. I was at FTI for a couple of years, and I worked in the blockchain digital assets practice. And I saw this firsthand, and I did a lot of Web3 work at McKinsey, which is where I co-created the futurist practice there, the futures practice, and we were very popular. We did it like 6 months before COVID. So we became very popular and we saw a lot of uncertainty and change. But the buzzwords is people would throw technology at something. And I divide the technology, and this is where it applies to the leadership of using it, is that there's experimental dollars in innovation and there's production. Then what happens is that right now, like back a couple of years ago, people were experimenting with a lot of projects and some things were working, some things were not, and it eventually moved to production and what worked and what not. We're doing the same thing now with AI. And I think for leaders, the one of the biggest things is with that collaborative aspect of it, they need to really look at the systemic workings of their company. That's where it's not just applying things to an application or to a system. It's actually looking at how does this transform the actual systems of the business. And then the last thing I would say for them is it's an opportunity, not just for autonomous systems, but it's about trust. And because if you put these systems in place and you don't apply the ethics to it, you don't deal with privacy or bias, it could actually be a lot worse for a company. So those are my couple of things for a leader.
Oh, so good to think about it in those terms, in terms of the behaviors that leaders might take to
Yeah.
create this change or to cope with the acceleration of change. But one of the ideas that you emphasize, Steve, is that we shouldn't just react to the future. I love how you introduced the concept of systems thinking, the
Mhm.
and thinking as opposed to the or thinking. And just that we don't react to the future, we have to design it. Can you
Yes.
explain the spectrum foresight method?
Yeah.
And I know you'll have an upcoming book on that, and how leaders can
Mhm.
use it to turn uncertainty into opportunity.
Yeah, the way I describe spectrum. So for those who are listening, who are I'll take it from two realms. One, if you're not familiar with futures and foresight, and those if you are. So futures and foresight, if you the core thing of a futurist is we look at possible futures, right? We don't predict the future. That's so despite all the predictions, emails, and posts in January, that's all the fun Ouija board stuff, but it's not anything that we really do as practicing futurists. And not just as a futurist, it's a foundational type of skill set. You could argue it's a job or it's a skill, and it's a skill that can be used with innovation work, with product work, with design, all kinds of. But the main thing with looking at these possible futures is, for a long time, the methods were about kind of archetypal methods, which is like a transformation, a collapse. It was kind of an all or none thing in these, methods, and I think we've kind of moved beyond that. So it's what we call pluriversal thinking. It's a fancy term for there's lots of different people in the future. So like people like we talked about AI as, let's keep it on this subject. Some people are looking at this as a complete collapse because their job for the last 20 years, they're having to reach, and they're just ready to retire. Like they don't want to deal with it. They don't want to learn it. They just see this as a complete collapse, or they're getting laid off and they don't know how to get a new job. And then there's others who are looking at this as like, finally, I can, leapfrog people and I can take this and wield this and be my transformation. So there's a spectrum of existence, and there's a spectrum of existence in those possible futures. So what we do with the method is we look and we obviously focus on things and keep, the scope focused, but we get into a few different aspects of this as we apply the super shifts method. We look at really, signals and patterns. But most importantly is we call it world shaping. So we look at snapshots of what the world that possible future looks like. And then we put in a scenario model that allows people to kind of have these perspectives. And these perspectives allow us to write different stories. Like, because the most important thing is like, who are the people that would inhabit this? Like, is your customer, like if you're trying to look 10 years out or you're 5 years out, it's going to impact you. But most importantly is that, okay, that's great, Steve. 2, 4, 5. What about I got to do it tomorrow? The whole point for us is that we wanted to make it not only actionable, but actionable today. So doing things like solutions and strategy, it allows us to bring it into we call it backcasting, but bring it into our world today. So we understand how to take advantage of it in our work. I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of the other models don't. And we wanted to help people like understand these shifts are happening. Being on a great show like yours, we can talk about it, but people are just trying to wrap their heads around so much change at the same time. With Spectrum, they're able to do that on a personal level, on an organizational level, and it's a method we've been using for a couple of years. We work with a lot of clients, and this is our chance to really get it out there. When we talk about it briefly, and we talk about an operating system to allow you to kind of manage this on an ongoing basis, because I think the biggest thing that people might be used to is seeing all these futures reports, like governments put them out, like climate in 2040 or something, and they basically go in a drawer. We don't want that to happen. So I think that's the way for us is allow people to take action with addressing the super shifts that are relevant to their work and life.
Well, that's great, and thank you for the compliment on the show as well. And it's just a great time for me to remind our listeners to subscribe, to leave a review, to make sure they tune in for future episodes of the People Dividend podcast. And Steve, if you were with so much focus on AI and automation technologies, how can leaders future-proof their own minds then and adopt a style to stay relevant in the AI-driven world? This would be of great interest to our listeners.
So future-proof their own minds, you said? Like, is that what you're kind of, yeah. That's an interesting question, because I think, it's funny, I read my newsletter on my LinkedIn. It's Stephen Fisher. I got lucky. I got my name because I'm pretty common name, but I write future proof is actually in my newsletter. So I'm very much about, you'll never make it purely, proofed. I mean, the Titanic, everything has its, challenges, but I think this is this is a wonderful environment if you like critical thinking and problem solving. If you're an autodidact, like if you really want to dive into things, I mean, this is a flourishing time, because I think about how much I'm able to produce now in terms of content and just being able to research and just, ask it to do a deep dive. Like, I think about the projects I worked on at McKinsey, like it would take weeks of research and, putting it all together. And it's like, I can write a really long prompt, put it in the research thing, and then come back in like 20, 30 minutes. And it's just this, I mean, I have to check it, of course, but it's beautiful. I think the people that you need to be comfortable with uncertainty. I think that's the core of also being a futurist. It's like there's an anti-fragile mindset, but there's also there is wonder in the uncertainty, and I think being able to adjust and then be resilient so that you don't derail yourself. Because I think there's an overwhelming aspect to this. There's so many tools out there. There's so many things. Like, how do you put it all together? I think that's being open to that change, being open to not locking yourself in. I think there's also one, we talked about systems and ethics, but I, I think for people, it's an opportunity to really focus on the other things. Before, we'd be overwhelmed with tasks and research and content and things we'd have to generate. Whereas an opportunity to open yourself up to developing the social side, the emotional intelligence. I think that's a beautiful thing. I think people can see, instead of just adding more because you have more time and doing more things, I think giving yourself the space, I think, is one of the hidden values if you can manage it. Like, that's the secret. Like, is to give, not just to do more, add more things, but to find, use those openings which you didn't have before to add to, the health of your mind and your spirit. So,
Well, this is people-centered leadership creates the people dividend.
yep.
And stemming from my earlier book on working and living authentically, we see this intersection. So I'm curious, personal insight from you, Steve Fisher, on, I mean,
Yeah.
you've spent decades working at this intersection of technology, leadership, and innovation. What's one
hmm
lesson from your career that's most shaped your perspective on the future?
Curiosity wins. Is
Hmm.
that um, you, as an artist, for me, I was actually very anti AI. If you talked to me 2 years ago, I resisted. I was one of the resistors, because I think for me, like, Mid-Journey was stealing from artists. It was learning, if you will, but it was based on, it wasn't, they weren't compensating authors. A model that really works well, I think I really applaud and I use as a great example, is 11 Labs. They do all the voice work, but you can be if you're a voiceover talent, or if you're trying to, break in, you can get if you use the voice, you get compensated for it. So you can make, it's another revenue stream, and I like that, and it learns from that system. I was very anti AI until I understood, that there is a learning process to it, but there's also a value in the technology and what it can do. I think for me, you can do things derivatively if you can write the right prompts and do the things and create art, and you create music, and it's wonderful. Like, I'm doing films, and AI filmmaking is like breakthrough. I think that's looking at these tools, you can do things before, especially from a prototyping perspective or a concept perspective, which you never could have before. But, you need to have empathy to really create. And I think those who are curious, those who continue to look at the world with the wonder and the excitement to create, and I think they'll be more rewarded than the others would. I think that's the thing I've learned the most, is those who, you know, not everyone's an autodidact, but I think if you can do that, I think you'll be in a good place.
Yeah, I always remember an expression: "Curiosity killed the cat, satisfaction brought it back." Now, just as we think about some actionable advice for our listeners, Steve Fisher,
Yeah.
where can our listeners find your book, Super Shifts, and learn more
Uh,
about your work?
yes. You can go to supershiftsbook.com. That's where we have some other things you can get, downloads, and sign up for all the news, and that's fit to print. You can get it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And our book is going to expand on super shifts and the future's operating system that's in super shifts. When we bring it in, but Designing the Future will be coming out. And the audiobook is actually coming out for super shifts in a few weeks. So if you're an audiobook person like I am, the funny thing is that it was a friend of Janae's. He's a professional narrator. He was a friend of Janae's that she went to high school with. So we're really happy to have him do the project. He's got a great voice, so we're looking forward to that. But that's where you can all the regular places to buy things. So,
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. And just as I think and reflect on our conversation today, Steve, what you've reminded me about is that the future isn't just something that happens to us; it's something that we can design. And that by understanding super shifts, your work on super shifts, reshaping our world, embracing emerging technologies responsibly, is a way we create a better future for ourselves and for the rest of the world and planet. So I'm so glad to have had you as a guest today, Steve Fisher, and I thank you and invite my listeners to connect with your work. And again, until the next episode of the People Dividend, I hope you can take time to subscribe, leave a review, or tune in for the next episode. Or, as Steve mentioned, or take a look at my LinkedIn newsletter. It goes out to thousands every week, and it's the Mike Horne newsletter on LinkedIn. Once again, until the next episode of the People Dividend, and thank you, Steve Fisher. Stay well.
Thank you.